Yeah, Jerry, let me introduce you, and then we can just sort of launch and just see where our discussion goes. But it's so wonderful to have you, Jerry, to see you again, to have you on Pacific Zen Luminaries series. We're very thankful for our history and our past relationship with you. David Weinstein and I, for those who don't know, sat Zazen with Jerry in Kamakura many years ago, 1986, for about the 6 months that he was there. And then when we both came back to Oakland, David was in good touch with him. And after a time, Jerry was kind enough for 6 years, I think, to give us a room where we could weekly meet at the what was called the Oakland Zendo at the time, in his warehouse in the downtown Oakland area. So he was very, very kind to us. And then, so many 2 degrees of separation. We bump into him here, and maybe we've got some stories in that regard. But Jerry Brown, longest serving governor of the great state of California, which is the fifth largest country in the world today. So not an insubstantial position. He was also a 3-time presidential candidate, and he gave both Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton a run for their money. He was mayor of Oakland. He was attorney general. He was so much more in the political sphere. But also what's really fascinating is he was for 4 years a Jesuit novitiate, and for a year or so he sat Zen in Japan, and he also went and aided Mother Teresa in India, in Calcutta, India, for a time. So throughout Jerry's political history, there's been this very strong stream of, I think, of spirituality, of morality, of sense of right and wrong. And he has so often tried to save the earth and help the people. So, Jerry, I just want to start off with a poem. It's from Dongshan, and it just made me think of your life, if I might. It goes like this. It's called the Dongshan's Five Ranks. He's a 9th century monk. Not deciding it is or it isn't. Do you have the courage to be at peace with this? Everyone wants to leave the endless changes. But when you're finished bending and fitting your lives, you come back to sit by the charcoal fire. And I feel that just so beautifully describes the arc of your very long and prestigious political career.
Well, I guess describing the chasing the endless changes, or trying to somehow create endless changes, that is one of the characteristics of politics, at least contemporary politics. I think one of my slogans might have been "Vote Change," and it amazes me as I've reflected on it, why people always want change. So we're really trained to look for change, and yet as we change, how much have we changed, and what's changing? So that interested me, and at that notion of chasing changes or trying to make changes reminds me of something we were told in the Jesuits, and I would say that Jesuits, in the training I had, the first 2 years was mostly in silence, only a few minutes a day, and maybe one day on Thursday you could talk longer, go for a walk. But it was a very medieval program of rigid programming every half hour, and very silent prayer, mass, spiritual reading, manual labor. But one of the things we were taught, we had an exhortation every day, an hour exhortation, and that was we weren't supposed to be hankering after novelties. So that was definitely a flaw. That was imperfection. Of course, you could define politics as the total quest for novelties. That's really what it. We always want something new because politics is embedded in the news cycle, and news is what hasn't happened yet, or what hasn't appeared to have happened. So we are definitely in the business in the political world of change, surfing change, because if we don't offer something different, however trivial, then it's not news. And if there's not news, there's no projection of your voice, your image, your story onto the media. And if there's no projection, there's no connectivity with the voters. And so you're nothing. So it can't work. So I thought that poem is well, it has many levels. I give it maybe a superficial level in the political about change.
Yeah, yeah.
That, of course, it reminds me of what changes. So in my own life, in fact, I was thinking about that today. You know, how much have I changed? I've thought of some of my friends, and some are getting a little more demented than others. And I think, well, boy, this guy's changed. So I think of myself. What's changed? Am I the same guy that went to grammar school in San Francisco? Or the same guy that went into the seminary or ran for president? I feel I'm the same guy, but I see things very differently. On the other hand, I see them not so differently. So it's a reflection that I have started to emphasize more, trying to understand just what's going on and where am I in this whole process.
What took you to the Jesuits, to Los Gatos, the novitiate? Your father, I think, was attorney general at the time, going to run for governor, and all of a sudden you go into a cloister, which was something actually that you've said he didn't really support very much.
No, he didn't support it. My father, um, he had to hustle. He was a go-getter, he and his brother. And he couldn't afford to go to college, so he went to night law school. But he was action. He wanted to do things, and so the idea that you're praying or contemplating, what are you doing there? When are you going to get out and teach or do something? So that he couldn't, had no understanding that I could perceive of what this whole novitiate was. Now, how did I get there? Well, I thought about the priesthood when I was in high school. Sometimes I would try to say a kind of a pretend mass in my room, but never get to. I was thinking about it in grammar school. I was drawn to it. I remember when I first went to catechism. I didn't go to the Catholic school yet. I went to a public school, and they'd have the stories of Adam and Eve and Moses and the bulrushes and Sodom and Gomorrah and the crossing of the Red Sea. All that seemed really interesting to me, more interesting than normal schoolwork. This is somehow there was another dimension that I liked. And then when I went to Catholic school, of course, I got a lot of it. But so I decided to go to Santa Clara. That was a little battle too. I didn't want. I got applied to Berkeley and Santa Clara, and at that time, which is completely different than the way even Catholics see it today, I always thought, and we were told, if you go to a public college, you might lose your faith. And I did not want to lose my faith. So I was determined to go to a Catholic school. My mother, on the other hand, not being a Catholic, was determined that I go to the University of California, where she went. But I went to Santa Clara. And before I did, I worked in a lumber camp up in Idaho. And I spent a lot of time by myself, just fixing a road. It was really a kind of a make-believe job that I got through various channels. But I was out on this road a lot in the middle of the St. Joe National Forest. I had a lot of time to think. At that time, I thought, well, I want to go into the seminary. This was after high school, but I didn't. But I definitely was thinking about it. So then I get down to Santa Clara, and somewhere along the line, March maybe of that would have been 56. I just woke up one morning and said, no, I have a vocation. I'm going to be a Jesuit. Now, why? I mean, how can I best understand it? First of all, I don't know why I thought that when I woke up one morning, but the life that I've been geared to, I wanted to get out of law school. I mean, I wanted to get out of college, get to law school, get married. But then the whole life did not interest me that much. Um, School, the whole normal realm. In fact, I wrote an essay which I've tried to find, but it's lost somewhere. It was called 20th Century Sleeping Sickness. That we're just asleep. We're walking like zombies. I had that feeling. Um, so the taste of the college excitement, it wasn't there. It had an emptiness. I don't know. I'm probably using different words than I used then, but I definitely thought that was not a path that would uh, illuminate, would satisfy, did not answer what was most important to me. And I thought, and I always had some doubt, God, religion. I said, well, how best to explore those doubts, resolve them, to go to a seminary. I visited there once. It's up on a hill. It's quiet. It's beautiful. So I thought, this is a great place to spend time. So it was that pursuit was definitely a rejection of the world. The world just seemed to me. Um, I heard a person uh, describe life as empty and meaningless, but that you should draw no conclusion from that. Well, I think there was a quality of empty and meaningless, the rituals of college, the hope of career, of whatever the hell it was, that would be entailed in that normal life, did not interest me. Um, I also had another thing that I could share, uh, which is kind of interesting. I had a girlfriend that I very much liked. But over time, particularly walking the roads of the St. Joe National Forest in the middle of Idaho, uh, I lost interest. And I juxtaposed the intensity of my feeling with the utter disinterest that took over. So that was kind of a shocking experience. Um, you can draw from what you will, but I was looking for something, something more, something, whatever I was finding, it was not enough. It was not, I was unsatisfied. Discontent
Right.
would have to be the description. So that brought me into the seminary, and I liked it a lot. It was yeah, it was quite a place. But now they said we were being taught, a life of perfection, and we meditated an hour a day, actually an hour and a half. We made a 30-day retreat where we had very intense meditations in accordance with the Ignatian way. Very intense meditations on hell and redemption and all sorts of stuff. And that all worked. And then I took vows, eternal vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience. But then after that vow taking on April 15th of 1958, then we enter a period of college. The same building, but we go across the building to a separate wing, which was called the juniorate. So this was the college. And they had a big library there. And the first book I pulled off was, I have the title right, Language, Truth in Action by S.I. Hayakawa. It's a book on semantics. And he described levels of abstraction. And that got me thinking how much abstraction was being bandied about in the novitiate. A lot of abstraction. So that got me thinking. Then, so it began to wear off, kind of like my high school love. It began to evaporate. And one day, after maybe my third year, I was talking to a priest, and I said, very empathetic priest. And I said, Father, his name was Father Berman. I said, Father, I have some doubts about I tried to express it very softly because doubting, if indulged, it becomes sinful. And this is really not what you want in a Jesuit seminary. And he said, well, that, he kind of nodded his head like a psychiatrist. And by not attempting to negate the expression of doubt, he completely cemented my doubt. And from that moment on, I never stopped doubting. Uh, or maybe put it this way, I never stopped believing. I never continued believing. So yeah, I never continued. So that was a wake up call. And then uh, I was in the seminary, no television, no TV, reading, radio, music, sacred music, but nothing else. And all you're doing is talking about philosophy or theology or spiritual ascetic practice. So a lot of talk about that. And it's a world of ideas. And so somebody came along, and in the junior you could have visitors. One of my friends, subsequently deceased, who was there, a friend came to visit him, and I got to join in the visit. So we could have a few visitors once we'd taken our vows. And the visitor was a guy from St. Ignatius. He talked about a book he's reading uh, about the absurd, about Albert Camus. He talked about the absurd, about uh, the human yearning for meaning and the absolute silence of the universe. And when I heard that, I said, well, that really rings true. That struck a real note with me. So at that point, I suppose I could conceptualize my thoughts as an absurd thinker, that you yearn, but there's no response. And the fact that it is absurd doesn't mean that you're supposed to give up, or that wasn't Camus' point. So anyway, between Camus and S.I. Hayakawa semantics, and then I got another book. In fact, that priest gave it to me, called Spirit and Reality by Nicholas Berdyaev. He talked about the spirit. The spirit listeth where it wilt. It's not contained. It's not objectifiable. Uh, and that was a bridge to a kind of Christianity that was not locked into the rigid categories of the Jesuit version of Roman Catholicism. So that very much affected me. Then I grabbed another book somehow called Man in Search of Himself by Rollo May. You have to remember, with no entertainment, ideas are quite subversive. Ideas have particular punch because that's your excitement at that type of life. So anyway, Rollo May talked about man in search of himself, anxiety, meaning. So we put all that together, and I said, okay, time for me to go. So I go to the head priest, Big Jack Conley, Black Jack Conley. I say, Father, I have some, I didn't want to say doubts because doubt is so heretical. I said, well, there's certain things that I have some trouble with. And we explored it a little bit. He said, we got to get you out of here. So I was gone by the afternoon. And I certainly could see there the power of doubt. Doubt is very, very subversive. And in a authoritarian, very doctrinal
It's not
organization,
really somebody who.
you can't have the doubt. At least they couldn't have my doubt. So when I went, and unlike 4 years before, when I wanted to go to Santa Clara because I didn't want to lose my faith, this time I went directly to Berkeley and got a room at the I House and got my degree there in a year and a half, and did experience Berkeley at the time when things were just building up. So it was a complete contrast, which was really my point. I'd done the isolation monastic view, which I very much liked and was into and appreciated. But now I wanted to try go into the world and see what the world had to say. So that was only 1960. So I think we ought to stop it right there. Those are formative thoughts. But you asked me, so I thought I would give you a fuller explanation of all that. And then from there, of course, a lot of things happened.
Yeah, no, that's really fantastic. That's great. And then I guess you got into sort of community organizing after you graduated from law school. Maybe you worked for a firm for a little while, but you entered statewide politics about 1971, right? And
I ran for,
and
well, wait, I ran for the junior college board, which
right,
I'd never heard of. I met someone who I knew him from somewhere, and he shook my hand. And I said, "Why are you shaking my hand?" "Well, I'm running for office. I want you to vote for me." I said, "What office are you running for?" So the Los Angeles College Board of Trustees. I said, "Oh, what's that?" "Well, they used to be part of the high school board of trustees. Now they broke off. They're going to have 7 new trustees just for the community colleges in LA, all 8 colleges at that time." So I said, "Oh, great, I'll run for that." And I did. And there were 124 candidates, which I was one. I came in first because they were listed alphabetically, so Brown was high up. And secondly, Edmund G. Brown was a name. My father had been governor as late as January of 67, and I was running in 69. So I had a little edge there. But if we could back up a little bit, when I was studying for the bar exam, I did so at the governor's mansion. And during that time, I came down, and my father I was upstairs on the 3rd floor studying for the bar, and it would put me to sleep. I had a very hard time studying for the bar. It was boring as hell. But anyway, my father was engrossed in a very heated conversation with the Speaker of the Assembly, that time Jess Unruh. He used to call him Big Daddy Unruh. And Big Jess Unruh wanted to be governor, and my father wanted to run for a 3rd term. And they were talking. And they didn't see me. I was on the stairway. I was eavesdropping. But as I listened to them, my heart started pounding. It was so exciting. So I said, wow, this is what I want to do. I'm going to run for governor. So that was the moment on the stairway for no other reason than the kind of the pulsating excitement of the encounter of one politician to another. Now, that may sound a little low. It's not giving back. It's not doing good. But I'm just telling you, that got me going.
yeah.
So
Well,
then,
the thing is, Jerry, that when you came into that statewide politics, you did a lot of good. You've talked a lot about how you wanted to do things that if nobody else was governor, that you could have impacted people's lives. And it's tremendous. In 1975, as early, you were deeply into environmental issues. You were deeply into labor law. And yet, you had an efficiency. You had to work with Prop 13 and some deep, deep cuts to education, which was very painful for you.
well, so this is a paradox. I did do, I think, some very important things. We got the first farm labor bill. Uh, we brought public members onto the regulatory boards, like architects and cosmetology and engineering boards. So we put more of a public face there. We started very much cracking down on pollution from cars. Real push the environment very strongly because I thought the environment was one of those absolute values that you can't violate the rules of nature without doing great damage. So yeah, I tried to do, yes, good, but I don't like to think of myself. Yeah, no, it is doing good, but I was very aware that unlike any other job I had, I liked the excitement. Maybe it's a little bit like being an excitement junkie, uh, but the encounter. Some people can just sit and study. I need more dialogue, the back and forth. In those offices, it's a constant dialectic, confrontation, cooperation. You have someone wants to do this, someone wants to do that. So you're in the midst, and it is intoxicating. It is distracting, but it is energizing as well. And so through all that, I think there was a lot of progressive legislation. I appointed more women to high positions, more African Americans, more Latinos than ever before. And I was dedicated to doing that. Now, I wanted to create that level of diversity. I was also aware that I was building a political profile. So you can't separate the political ambition from the substance of what you're doing. Or can you detach the joy of it, the pleasure, the being in it, and that's quite good. But at the same time, I did have a certain detachment. I could separate from it and see this. There was a lot of illusion here, and what did it all add up to? I did have that idea that you mentioned briefly. I wanted to do well. I thought to myself, what might I do that if I didn't do it, would not be done? Because I had the feeling that government is on automatic pilot. The legislature, the lobbyists, the bureaucracy, it's all rolling forward. And the governor is more of an announcer. They wheel him out, he makes an announcement of a bill, an appointment, of executive order. But what really wouldn't have happened? I think the Farm Labor Bill, for example, I worked with Cesar Chavez and got that done. That was quite extraordinary at the time. Although, as it turns out, and where we are now, you can wonder, it's certainly not measured up to its promise. I think in the environment, on tailpipe emissions, trying to get a better control on the excesses of industrial process. I think that was very, very productive. And one of the things that we created was the Office of Appropriate Technology. And that was very much on the idea of Schumacher, not necessarily small is beautiful, but what's appropriate. What, not more than you need, but enough of what you need. And there was that Jesuit principle, which I think is very Buddhist. In Latin, they called it quantum quantum. So much, how much? So much you need, that's how much you do. No more, no less. And so I think that appropriate technology was pioneering. Of course, after I left, George McMahon got rid of it. Also created a wellness commission. That at the time, wellness was a very odd word, and that certainly led to focus on wellness as well as sickness. So yeah, it was a time of ideas and excitement. But all through that time, I was quite ambitious. I ran for president twice.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, tell us about that excitement. In interviews, you've said that was one of the most exciting things you've ever done is run for president for good reason. All of a sudden it's all national and international.
Yeah, we were talking about Israel. I remember talking to one of the great political organizers, Howard Lowenstein, who helped spearhead the Dump Lyndon Johnson movement. I said, Al, this is 76. I'm a Carter. I said, what is Israel, the Palestinians? What the hell's the answer, Al? He said, good footwork. Good footwork. Well, in some ways, Biden might have listened to that and had a little better footwork than jumping in the way he did. So, but as I read, they did a movie on me. I didn't like the title. It's called The Disruptor, The Great Disruptor or something. And it showed a lot of the film clips. And I must say, as I looked at this young, I guess you could say handsome character, glib, it looked very empty to me. In fact, it's embarrassing. That's why other people say, boy, that looks exciting. But it looked, what's that all about? Because it's so formulaic. But at the time, I was driven by that. By the way, you don't get to be governor at the age of 36 unless you're ambitious. You got to have a spur, a burr in your saddle that's driving you forward. And of course, I didn't get married. I was a full-time pursuit of being governor. When I was Secretary of State, I was already running for governor. So I was on the case all the time. And I liked it. I liked writing press releases. I liked the whole process. And I liked being, and after I was governor, I liked the substance. I remember I could get into things. I remember during the fluoridation movement. And I got called in all the doctors. I said, wait a minute, you want fluoride? Tell me, where do they fluoride? Where do they have fluoridation of the water? They say the city, I think back in Ohio. I said, how about the number of dental visits? Are they more or less? They said, well, they're no different. I said, well, then how do you know fluoride's going to work? Now, as it turns out, I think fluoride's pretty good. But at the time, I could engage in some of these discussions. Midwife, another thing I was very supportive of was midwifery. And I supported lay midwives because they were being arrested at the time. So things like that. Oh, there's
Yeah.
another call. There was a group that built homes, houses, not homes, in the woods, Mendocino, Nevada County, Lake County, and they were getting red tagged. And so they came to my office one night in '75. They called themselves United Stand. And so I helped forge a Class K exception to the state housing code that will allow you to have a much simpler code requirement for building your own house in rural settings. So there are any number of occasions, some small, but there was something real there that we could do. And it's so I was always interested in what was different, you know,
Yeah.
because I often thought if I never showed up, it's all going to happen. It's all pretty programmed.
Right. So by the early 80s, you had finished 2 terms as governor. You had run for president a couple of times. You ran for Senate. You lost, which was very unexpected and
No, not
very
so unexpected.
no.
No,
The
I
polls
screwed up that.
supposedly showed you
I
ahead, right?
no, that's not true. I screwed up that medfly. That's a whole nother story.
Oh
We don't
yeah.
talk
Well,
about that.
yeah.
That also, there's another one. Running for president, 1980. First of all, I thought Carter was weak. I thought I might be able to beat him because I did well in '76. But the last war doesn't tell you about the next one. And Kennedy then jumped in. Once you had Kennedy and Carter, you had 2 elephants. And I was a little mouse. I mean, this is ridiculous. I should have got out. But I was blinded. And I can reflect back on that, my lack of clarity. So I stuck in. But every time I was there, people would, criticize me in the legislature. This is going wrong. That's going wrong. Brown is out running for president. And so that projected a very strong message of not doing my duty, not doing what I was elected to do. So that brought me way down in the polls. And then Medfly came along, and that looked like a apocalypse now disaster, spraying Medfly by helicopters at midnight. So I was in a weak position. And this guy, Pete Wilson, not an impressive guy when you meet him, but he beat not only me, he beat Feinstein for governor, beat my sister for governor, and he beat Leo McCarthy, I think, for the Senate. So he's pretty good fighter. Anyway,
So you lost the Senate race, and now this is when you started to come in. We first met you, and I'm wondering, that you had very early on been very successful politically. Now it was ended, and you've talked about dark night of the soul and the cloud of unknowing. Was this kind of a dark night of the soul moment
no,
for
I
you?
wish I could tell you that, but it was not a dark night. I haven't had too many dark nights. Fortunately or not, I've had a pretty stable and I think fairly happy existence. But I thought as you was talking, I should, before we get to Zen, how did I get to Zen in the first place? And there was a conference in 1961 at the University of California in San Francisco Med Center on the mind, conference on the mind. And Aldous Huxley was the luncheon speaker. And he talked about the problems of our education, how they weren't educating key fundamental aspects of the child, of the human person. So he talked about this. Seemed but very interesting. I mean, just the way the tall, with his bushy eyebrows, standing up there with his English accent, I was very moved by it. So when he came out, I went up to him, walking out of the dining room. I said, well, how could I find out more of this education you're talking about? He said, I'll give you a book. Zen, I think, was it Zen Bones, Zen Flesh?
Zen flesh, Zen bones. Yeah,
Zen Flesh. Okay, so I got that.
Paul
Was
Reps.
my ball rep. So I heard about that. So as soon as I was elected governor, well, in June, I won the primary. I went to the Trappist monastery for a couple of days. But then when I won the full election in November, I went to Tassajara. I was determined. I wanted to go to a Zen monastery. I'd never been to one. Didn't quite know what Zen was. I didn't know what Zen was, but I went there. So I went for a couple of days, and I just showed up. They were in practice session. They weren't supposed to let you in. But of course, I'm the new governor, and I guess Roshi Baker has some ambition in his soul there. So he was at San Francisco Zen Center. He drove down to meet me. And when I went to the little house there an hour before you get up to Tassajara, we just drove right in, and there we were. And I started doing Zazen and taking the hot baths. So that was a good experience for me. And then, of course, when I was governor, I spent a lot of time at Green Gulch. I like to go over there and spend the day or the night. And I often say the reason why Clinton won and I lost is that Clinton spent his time cultivating the powerful, the lobbyists, the connected. I spent too damn much time at the Zen Center. But here we are, these many years later, and I have a lot of good friends still in touch. Paul Rosenblum is part of that Zen Center, Baker Roshi as well, Gary Snyder and others. Not that I think if I would have gotten elected, I don't know what the hell I would have done, because when I know now, I haven't stopped studying at all. In fact, I study more since the last 30 years. I see the world in so many such different terms that I might have replicated all the errors that I think Clinton repeated and exercised. So what I've seen, I would have been different. I might not have pushed capital punishment. I wouldn't have pushed the NAFTA. I might not have pushed NATO forward. But who knows? Because once you're there, you're caught up. The power of groupthink, it's overwhelming. Some of the English journal, what do they call them? Literary people, and talk about an imaginary. You got an imaginary, I got an imaginary. It's a certain way of being enveloped in a certain world of perceptions. Well, that's the way it is in the government. It's certainly that way in Vietnam. Groupthink, it's another way to say it. So when you're in these offices, the imaginary is quite powerful and it's shared, and to deviate from it takes a very detached mind. And I did work at that, and to a degree, I think, unusual, I did separate myself. However, my political desires often inclined me to do what the imaginary dictated anyway, because I could calculate that was the road to reelection. So it has its own demands.
Well, you dropped that for a time,
What?
and you
Yes.
dropped the politics for a time, and you decided to go out to Kamakura, and then at some point you decided to go to Calcutta. What
Yeah.
took you to Yamada Roshi
All
and
right.
Kamakura?
Well, I was on a trip. I created an institute of national strategy, and we had a whole group. We went to Russia and we went to China. And on the way to China, we stopped in Tokyo. So I wanted to go see. I went to Sophia University. I went to the door, and I think the little bell or something. And I said, I want to talk to somebody. I want to talk to a Jesuit who knows something about Zen Buddhism, Zen meditation. So Father Dumoulin came out. I talked to him for a couple hours. He said, well, if you want to talk to somebody, I'm not your guy. You got to talk to Father LaSalle. So I said, good. So I don't know whether it's the next day or later. I came over and I met with LaSalle. We talked for several hours. I took notes, and he said, okay, if you want to, I said, well, how do I practice this? He said, well, go to Kamakura and go practice under Yamada Roshi. He's my teacher. So that's how I came across Yamada Roshi, from Sophia Dumoulin to LaSalle. And that's how I got there.
Well, how was that experience for you in Kamakura? Because you pretty much dropped all communications with the outside world that you'd previously had.
Yeah, well, I stayed there. I liked it. I don't know if liking is the point. It's I like the sitting. I like the day shows. I like the people. I like the whole topic. It was like being, some degree, like being back in the seminary, but without the dogma. Because when you're in the Jesuit seminary in 1956, you got to believe all this stuff. And there's a lot of factual propositions that I don't think there's any empirical evidence for. Whereas in Zen, it's a different, it's similar, because in the retreat, in the Jesuit principle, the foundation of the Ignatian, the spiritual exercise, the foundation talks about Ignatian indifference and overcoming what he called inordinate attachments. That was you got to free yourself from inordinate attachments so that then you can see clearly, and the work of God's grace can operate within you. So then in Zen, there's another aspect of attachment. How do you stop attaching? How do you just sit, just see, just follow your breathing? So I felt this was on the right path. I felt it was similar. There was a common truth there. So and I thought pursuing it in this way, it had an authenticity that I didn't experience, at least after a while in the Jesuit order. I like that idea of great commitment, great doubt,
Great faith,
great
great
faith, great
aspiration.
doubt,
Yeah.
great commitment, but great doubt that spurs you. So instead of doubt being the enemy, doubt is part of the whole process. So I did think that was Yamada Roshi was just his presence, just the being there. You can't invent that. I mean that was it's a very strong experience. It's a strong reality. I don't want to call it an experience. It is what it is, and I very much like being there. I like during the was it the Zenkai? I guess we did or even the sesshin. We sleep on the mats, men upstairs, women downstairs. I like sleeping on that mat in the middle of that, and that's a tatami mat. In fact, I still sleep on a tatami mat. I like that. So it had a purity to it that that I found it drew me to it.
Yeah, yeah. And you lived in a traditional Japanese house in Omachi, didn't you? I was talking to David, and
Yes.
we all lived in that Omachi house. If you go to the police station at the train station and you look at the map, they have Omachi's house and it says Gaijin there, which means foreigner. So it's considered the foreigner's house in
Yeah.
town.
Well, it was pretty cold. I remember I had three levels of long underwear. I had a silk long underwear, I had a cotton long underwear, and I had wool underwear. And I put a hat on, and I put my socks on. It was cold, but somehow it was okay. I
Yeah.
got through it.
And then you went out to Mother Teresa, and you let me just read something that you said about that. Politics is a power struggle to get to the top of the heap, and Calcutta and Mother Teresa are about working with those who are at the bottom of the heap, and to see them as no different from yourself and the needs as important as your needs. And you're there to serve them, and doing that, you are attaining as great a state of being as you can. I thought that was a really lovely quote.
Well, yeah, it was very impressive. What was impressive? Mother Teresa was very impressive. Just the way she talked. She spoke with authority, and I don't find many people who have that quality. But also the volunteers that were there. It was a very it was a good group. They were doing something, and I was glad to have been there. I didn't stay very long, but while I was there, it was a different experience. It was so separate from the the grasping, the getting, and remember, my whole trajectory is to reach for the top, to try to get to that next office. So this was a kind of a welcome alternative, a welcome difference, where you're just serving, and that fits with my former seminary training and the notion of also seeing the other and seeing that there aren't real differences, seeing yourself in the other person. I think that's all. And I also thought, because when I was sitting in Zazen, it seemed very clean and safe. And so I thought, I want to go over there to Calcutta and directly contact a rougher kind of reality, which I did. And so that was helpful too. Yeah, a different aspect in this quest to understand.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you thought that she was one of the most charismatic people you'd ever met. She, Dorothy Day, and Cesar Chavez
Well,
as leaders.
I well, yeah, I refined that a little bit by saying Chavez had an aura, no question about it. Dorothy Day had an aura. I listened to her once. Went down to work to visit the fields in Stockton, 1960, when I was at Berkeley, and we stayed all night at a little country church. And the next day she came and gave us a talk, and she was sitting in a little fold-up chair, and we were all sitting around her. After she finished, I said, "I'd like to know more," kind of like what I did with Aldous Huxley. I said, "How could I know more about what you're talking about?" She said, "Read Paths in Utopia by Martin Buber," which I did read. I've read a few times. So that's the whole idea of the commune, not just the consumer commune, but a more communal life, life that you get in a monastery or in a commune of some kind. So she also was down to earth. She just spent her whole life with those, on strike, poor people being evicted or whatever problems. She gave witness. She wasn't changing the world, and Mother Teresa wasn't changing the world, but she was present, and she was responding to the people in front of her within the grasp. And I've taken that lesson. And another person who influenced me, Ivan Illich, always talk about when you think about distant people, how you care about them. He said, "I don't give a damn about people in Yugoslavia or something. I care about the person I can touch." And because when you care, you have to respond. So there is a certain presence, reality, actuality that Calcutta under Mother Teresa, and for that moment, Dorothy Day, these were teachers that were completely antithetical to the political process, the political game as it exists. And it is, in many ways, a discreditable kind of enterprise.
It's interesting, Jerry, and just hearing you talk again and again about this concreteness, this search for concreteness, which, I think is it's a very Zen, sort of move. And it's refreshing to hear that from somebody who's been in politics for as long as you have.
Well, part of the reason, I can't explain why I do anything, but how I got here to the Mountain House, which, of course, the Mountain House burned down in 1971, but I built a new one. And but I wanted to, there's something about walking in the path of your ancestors. And I'd always heard about the Mountain House. And I thought, this is a place apart, but it has significance. And so I thought, what a great place to reflect. What a great place to be and to see. And today, as I walked out, and we've had all this rain, 22 inches, quite a lot. And the oak trees are extremely green. There's a little grove right here, not 100 feet, 200 feet from where I'm talking here. And it was so green. the oak trees are so beautiful, and just seeing them. And of course, a couple of months ago, they were dead. They were just brown, not a leaf in sight. So the transformation, the movement of nature through its many cycles, that can be perceived. So this is a good place to reflect, whether it's on politics or one's life or meet one's friends. It's a place. I think place is important. I thought that Gary, I learned that from Gary Snyder, his place. But monasteries have that place. Trappists take a vow of stability, not to leave the place. So I think this, and not only is this a good place, but there was a Buddhist monk who wanted to do a monastery here. They later, I think, did it in Lake County, but we're going to give them 40 acres to do that. And they found it very compatible. Not compatible enough because they went to Lake County. But so this is a place that has a serenity. It reminds me of monasteries. And so I like that when I did the retreat with the Jesuits in the mountains outside of Tokyo. What is that? Shimagetsu?
Shimekutsu, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did.
That's a great retreat center up there.
Yeah, so we did that. And then the Trappists in Vina, California, and then the Jesuits. They're not at Los Gatos. So, and then there's Green Gulch in Tassajara. And then there's the Kamal Delis down by Esalen. So there's a lot of places are important and can be a place for not only gathering, but for clarity and inspiration.
You said in an interview, when I walk my dogs at night, I look up at the stars, and I think of my grandmother Ida Schickman, and what did she think, and what did my grandfather think when she was so little and just a little girl, and what did she feel? I really got that great impression of your corgi dogs and just the beautiful star-filled sky.
See, yeah, my grandmother, when she used to read me Bible stories and would talk to me about the mountain house, she left here when she was 18 in 1896. She went down and she met a guy named Brown. That's my grandfather. She married Brown. That's my father. Pat Brown came from that marriage. And she said it's a special place. Or maybe she said it's a marvelous place. Whatever she said, it was conjoined with the Bible stories that had a mystery to it. I didn't know what the mountain house was. So when I first came here, I didn't come here for decades. And when I first showed up here, it's not on a mountain. The hotel still stood then, the stagecoach stop, but it's surrounded by mountains. So we're right in the middle of this valley with mountains, hills, like they go up 1,100 feet on all sides. And they're very sculpted. So when the moon comes up, the stars, there's no electricity here. There's no we're off the grid. It does lend itself to a reflection. That's the same thing that other people saw. Of course, I also think of the people who were here before, the native people. We've found 15 or 16 mortars where they ground acorns. This stagecoach stop right on the Leesville Road here was the trail. The archaeologists think that went to the coast, and we have lots of arrowheads and lots of evidence of the early settlers who were here, and the early people, the native people, here for thousands of years. I often think about that. Thousands of years, and all of a sudden, these Europeans show up, and a very short amount of time, their whole way of life is gone. Poof, no longer existing. And so then I think of course, my grandmother's life. There was no cars or horses, a stagecoach. How these lives change. And being on the chairman of Bolton of Atomic Scientists, I think, with the nuclear blunder ever possible, through mistake, through blunder, whatever, the whole thing could go poof again. I think we've lived. So I think of that, the impermanence I don't know if that's the Zen point of impermanence, but I feel it's real impermanent. Uh, Trying to understand that. So then how do you address that? And so then you kind of notice that and react best you can. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
my grandmother did make it sound special, mysterious, not humdum. I grew up in San Francisco, went to West Portland, pretty humdrum. It was not exciting. This was not the left bank of Paris. This was not the existentialists. This is not Albert Camus or Sartre. This was just one day after the other, clean. Nobody's going to jail. In fact, on our block, there was only one couple that she was a divorcee, and it was noticeable. She'd been married before. That was the thing. Everything else was so plain, very vanilla, very standard, very solid, I guess, but definitely not something that I started going away from that. Looking, where is the depth? Where is life at its in a way that it measures up to what I think life ought to be about.
yeah. That's great. I'd like to open up to John Tarrant and David Weinstein, who you know uh, very well, and see if they have any questions or comments at this time.
Oh, hi, Jerry. I was saying before we went on that I think I don't know if I met you then, but when you had a firehouse in San Francisco and you
Yeah.
used to give it to, we used it as a Zendo, and I would come down the fire pole to give Tasha, which is in kimonos, and that was great. And so your generosity to the people doing something real and meaningful has just always touched me, and your interest in that, and I guess I think about how much you've had such a life of action and wanting to do things, and I think it's good to the way you acknowledge that. Well, that's damned exciting, and I'm not just being humble and virtuous. It's really exciting, but I'm also trying to do good. So it seems to me like just hearing you talk, you just have a
Yeah.
kind of just instinctive feel for when it's time to go and do a little contemplation at temple at the monastery or whatever. And and do you have a theory about that? Like, you just seem to you've now found you're in your own monastery now, I guess, but you've found a way to have a peaceful environment. And can you talk about that a bit? Because the political life is so intense. And how do you find peace inside that?
Well, during the time I was governor, I would go up and visit Gary Snyder, who I met. I met at the San Francisco Zen Center. I met a number of people, uh, Stuart Brand and Gary, and I met him through Dick Baker because I'd met him as I went to Tassajara in November, and then I took over in January. So Gary, I would go there often, and I liked it. I know his story. I didn't know as much about his Buddhist history as I learned later, but he'd been the '60s, the beat generation, the excitement. In fact, when I left the seminary in second week of January 1960, the first thing I did was to go to North Beach and go to the last evening at the jazz club, I think, where they had poetry and jazz. I wanted to soak up what I could of this beat experience, the Coexistence Bagel Shop, which is on the corner. So I knew all that, and Gary was part of that. But what was important was that he built this house right there off the grid, and people helped him do it. He had a Zendo there, and so he created a whole life out in the woods. So that back to the land. So I somewhere in the back of my mind, I said, okay, I'm going to go back to the land. And I bought some land next to Gary, bought it, I don't know, 140 acres or something, 160 acres, because I thought it was so pretty. And this land up here in Calusa is dry. You come up here in the summer, it's hot. As my father said when I asked him, "Did you come up here as a kid?" He said, "No, too hot and too many rattlesnakes." So it's dry. Right now with all the rain, it looks a little bit like Napa, but it's not Napa. It's hot. This is cattle country. And it doesn't look like the 3,000 feet where Gary is near Malakoff Diggings. But I learned, and I love those trees, the Douglas fir, ponderosa pine. But then I got to like the oak trees. Now I love the oak trees, and they're here, and they change, with the seasons. They drop their leaves, they bring them back. So I've learned, now I find this, I don't want to make comparisons, but I really love this land. I appreciate it. I love to look at, I love to look at these oak trees. As a matter of fact, I've got some scientists working because where all of the cows are, there are no new oak trees. There are no rejuvenation. And all these oak trees that are so big and so beautiful, most of them grew before there were any cows here. There haven't been cows here for 60, 70 years. So I got a little experiment to protect fledgling oak trees, see if we can't preserve them. Anyway, it's a beautiful land. It's a live land. It's very much, it's got its own character. So knowing the land, knowing your place, that's what Gary Snyder's poetry was. The poem Accent, know your place, know the creek, know the pebbles, know the feeling of the water in your feet. So that's a very concrete. And so I try to emulate that. In fact, I brought Gary out here because it's 2,500 acres. I said, "Gary, now where should I put my house?" Well, he couldn't make up his mind either. But I decided to put it where the old stagecoach stop was, which is right by the road. And but I definitely am thinking of place as Gary talks about it. The allegiance, pledge allegiance to Turtle Island, and all those place-based poems. So that was an influence. So here I am.
Well, yeah, the place itself is the temple, where you're telling us here. Yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
And quiet, so quiet. Some people, they come here, they can't sleep because there's no noise. Like noise, well, when it rained a lot, we had crickets. So you can hear crickets. And then we got some doves that make some noise. But if they're not cooing, it's dead silence. Maybe not dead silence, just perfect silence.
Well, the other thing I wanted to do was just thank you, because you've been an inspiration to many of us for a long time. And it's kind of nice to see you both doing stuff, but also having an inner life and holding up the virtue and beauty of the inner life, which is an important thing. And it's not a strong suit in our culture. So thank you.
Another thing that struck me, I learned through my times with Gary Snyder, I was there in Nevada City when they, on something called the Re-Inhabitory Theater, put on a little play. Peter Coyote was in that. And I never heard that word, re-inhabitation, but I got the idea. You re-inhabit. That's what I'm doing here. It's been inhabited, now I'm re-inhabiting it. And it was a stagecoach stop, but it's a place of hospitality. I've had the Native Plant Society, I've had entomologists from the Academy of Sciences, I have UC hydrologists coming here. I have people now studying find out ways we can regenerate oak trees. So it's a place of activity, a place of learning, to study the land.
Yeah.
So one of my addictions is news. And on my little phone here, I have apps on Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Chronicle. I have spent 4 or 5 hours on that. So I'm very addicted. What's going on with Trump? What's going on with Biden? What's going on in Gaza? All that stuff. But then we have this other reality. We got the place. We got the land. What is it? How does it function? And just studying the land. It's a study in itself. You could spend decades longer trying to understand it. We have scientists doing that. You can also come to appreciate it from just the aesthetic or just a real presence point of view. It lends itself to that. It's not like I go to San Francisco, got a little place there, the clang of the cable cars and the sirens running around and noise and traffic. We don't have any of that. So it's a good place apart, and yet it's a place of hospitality. And we invite people. In fact, if some of you people would like to come by, you'd be very welcome. Maybe you can do a walking meditation, walking up one of our hills.
Very good. Yeah, well,
We have many. What?
good. You need hills. The not doing enables the doing in some way in the old Zen, the old Chinese poets. Doing Zazen and then moving into the world, and it's a very old Chinese idea. So
Right.
Seems about right.
Well,
Dave Weinstein.
I did set a room aside with my cushion and zabuton, but I didn't. Somehow I got caught up in the activities of life. But I'm inclined. I'll return to Zazen. Who knows? Very quickly.
I remember Gary, I
What?
remember you sending me pictures of your meditation hut, I believe is not far from where you are now. Isn't that true?
Well, that's a story. I have a friend here that I met. He was with the Resource Conservation Service. He's now retired. He's walked this land more than any other human being, knows more about it. He's identified and collected and mounted over 300 wildflowers on this land. He walked every up and down, you name it. Anyway, Jack, now I've lost my train of thought. What did you ask me?
About your meditation hut.
Oh, right. Yeah, see, my mind wanders. So Jack said, this guy, Jack Alderson, I was describing to him, he said, I'm going to build you a hut. I said, good. And we drove around and said, where can it be? Well, it's up in the hills, about a mile from where we are, just in the middle of a hill. It's great. Well, it's a view. You can't see any structures. And he just built a hut, about 8 feet by 8 feet, windows. And there it is. He wanted to build a hut. We got a hut. And kind of made me think. Someone sent me a book about Heidegger's hut, which is a little bigger. Heidegger had a hut. I said, well, if Heidegger had a hut, I ought to have a hut. And I do. And I go up there. But it's really just the idea, this guy built it just to have it there. And it's yet to be, its use will be discovered as people come and visit.
I'd like to join John in thanking you because, when we were sitting in a Montessori school in Oakland that had a fire and suddenly had no place to sit, we contacted you hoping you might direct us to a place to sit, and you did, your living room there in the American Bag Company, and then continued to invite us to join you when you moved into We the People, and that was much appreciated, and want to thank you for that.
Well, I thought I could maybe get a little Zen, a little contact high for meditation.
And Jon Joseph mentioning you walking your dog at night and seeing the stars and all, and reminded me of getting a telephone call from you about 10 o'clock at night when you were the mayor of Oakland, and you explained you were out walking your dog, Dharma, and you had met someone on the street, a woman who was troubled with drug use, and you called me to ask if I could help you help her, and that was, I think, just kind of sums up what I understand about my experience of you is you're a kind and caring person.
Well, it was actually some other guy was giving me a bad time, blaming me for all sorts of his troubles in Oakland. And this woman was standing there and said, don't blame the mayor. This is our, so she kind of defended me. But she turned out, she had a very troubled life. But I helped her move into another place, and we did some things that set her on her way. But there's a whole subculture over there in Oakland that it's much closer in Oakland. I was right there.
Right.
Unlike San Francisco, live in a more protected neighborhood right there. The full diversity of Oakland is very manifest.
Yeah, that's like you walking the land where you live now. You walk the land in Oakland when you lived there.
I do.
Mhm.
Here we see different. Today I've already seen 4 or 5 jackrabbits. 5 days ago I saw a river otter, which I hadn't seen all the 5 years I've been here. So a little otter there that is about. And we have turtles on our creek.
Mm.
So and the coyotes haven't been howling, but there's a lot of activity here. A lot of raptors, bald eagles, golden eagles, buzzards, you name it. There's a lot of it's quiet, and we don't have a television. So I told someone, oh, I don't have a television. They looked at me like I was a freak or something. But where did I go? I went down to get my hip replaced at UCSF, and I was in the hospital overnight. And they had the TV on. I said, get that thing off. It was like an assault. It was like a digital acupuncture of my whole being. Points of complete annoyance. Anyway, so that's the last I saw of television.
Well,
Although I have this damn thing, and I think the true test of whatever my enlightenment is could be is when I put this away more hours than I do now.
well, one last thing. When you said that your time in Kamakura reminded you of seminary, I was reminded of how when I saw you riding your bicycle back and forth to the Zendo and to Omachi, and you know, you always I always thought that you reminded me of a monk, and how you just were just into your practice, and it was inspiring.
Well, maybe I aspire to being a monk in some way.
Mm.
I definitely, that whole world of the world apart. It's powerful. It's a long history. There's a lot there
Mm.
to be learned, to understand. So, and in the building itself, the monastery. I guess you can be wherever you're always yourself wherever you are, but the monastery and the monk go together. But of course, you can experience some. I don't want to call it monkish because that already sounds that's a pejorative.
Mm.
But the point being that the quandam, the ordinary was good. I mean that said in the seminary, the sanctity of the everyday life, but just the tedium of the games, the illusions, the samsara, the chasing, all this stuff. I definitely see. It looks to me quite like a game. I'm pretty aware of that, and I think about that. So it's a game, but it's a game we have to play in some way. So what is and what isn't? That's the question.
Jerry, I do notice that you did get married in the end,
In the
and
end,
there's
well, it
a
wasn't quite
strong
the end. It
there's a
was the
strong
age of 67. That was my first entry upon the altar.
Right. That was really good. I was saying that they're going to say that there's a strong Zen view in some of the schools that's a good. Your practice can't really be alive unless have a companion or in some sort of close, intimate connection with people. And the whole idea is the monastery is the real cooker, but then family is even more of a cooker in some ways. So, or just as much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's very interesting. Not interesting. It's good. Yeah. What did God say to Adam? Man was not supposed to be alone. I think that's in Genesis.
Right.
Well,
Very good.
I appreciate that. And so and my wife, she was an official at the Gap, and before that was a lawyer. very active. Here we are out in the middle of nowhere. All our neighbors are in the cattle business. They're not your Berkeley liberals by any means. Trump carried Colusa County 62%. Newsom recall passed 62%. So we're in down home country, but people are very. But she likes it. She likes it, although she hates Trump and is determined to, just wants to see him gone. But anyway, she thrives out here too, because it's a miracle to be at the place where, in one sense, it began. My great grandfather, as he came across the ocean, came to California way back in 1852. So there's a connectivity, and that has a reality to it. And when you're in politics, has an unreality to it. If you think of the excitement of campaigns and these commercials that you spend so much money on, and once they're over, they're absolutely forgotten. It's gone. So there's a lot of ephemera that here that you've got the seasons, and the moon comes up every 28 days. We see it waxes and wanes. So the stars move around. So all that is, I think, a good. It's the way life was for the first America, for the first peoples here. It was for most people, or they got so much into the urban distraction, the urban excitement, and the urban power. You can't deny it. There it is. It's important. But this is a very special place. And when you have access, as we do to Zoom, well, we're not completely out in the woods. We're wherever we are. We're in many, many rooms with many people. So modern technology does transform. Although I think this is very useful. There's no substitute for presence.
Agreed. Yeah. Jon, I think you have other things to do that you want
Just a couple thoughts, Jerry. You've said in the past that you didn't want to talk about legacy, leaving a legacy. I don't know if you feel that way still, but I can't help but feel that you've left a tremendous legacy, perhaps footsteps in the sand. But I think people have, young people coming up. We talk a lot about the future, and we talk about how old guys like us and old gals like us, we get down about the future. But John Tarrant said a really interesting thing. He says to be depressed and negative about the future assumes too much knowing, And I talked to my 25-year-old daughter. She doesn't want to hear about the depression of global warming. She's instead working in the woods to make sure that wildland fires don't spread, as in the way that they once did. So can you say anything about the legacy that you feel like you've created?
Well, I've often said, not that what I often say is all that important, but legacy is a weird term. It's a verb they need in stories. Like you're going to jeopardize your legacy, or you're doing that for your legacy. But what the hell is a legacy? What's the legacy of all these other governors? They're eminently forgettable. And it's so, it struck me because I was around. My father was governor, and much more so when I was governor in 75. And then be around 28 years later, I had some memory of the prison system, of a lot of things. So I can remember the way things were. But in general, nobody remembers. There isn't much history. It's all newsflash activities today, this bill, this problem, this crisis. And so a legacy, you'd have to sit and reflect, and there'd have to be something lasting. But everything is today's news. News is, to me, the key variable of politics. News. Look good on the news, make news, and that's the opposite of legacy. Legacy, you're saying, well, what's going to endure? Now, I'm reflecting maybe do some more serious writing, and there I can try to probe just what I did, what its significance, what's the connection between my personal experience and the more general activity experience of people, the world. But legacy, what is a legacy? Well, only the first woman chief justice had the farm labor.
Well, you've already done it. You've already done it. So,
I
because
don't,
you remember and we remember. So.
well, but it doesn't interest me. And in one sense, legacy bores me. That's not what doesn't bore me is there some significance? What's the significance of my journey and what I've done? That interests me. But
Yeah.
legacy seems like a static, like a statue. Like there's the legacy. You did X. Well, there's so many X's. Every day there's 1,200 new bills every year. There's appointments, there's controversies, there's this, there's that. And today blots out yesterday. And tomorrow will blot out today. So legacy is a backward-looking concept. Maybe it's a good idea that we ought to have a little more focus, a lot more focus on what's gone before. And we're very present focused. So maybe the subject of legacy is a good one, but I've noticed, but people don't remember. Things were really exciting. The electricity crisis under Gray Davis, very exciting. Who the hell remembers that? Who the hell remembers Medfly? That Medfly was a horror. Having to spray malathion over the liberal environmentalists of Santa Clara County. What a terrible outcome. And yet now, who's worried about Medfly? So legacy is a concept that you need to reflect on more if you want to use it in some meaningful way. That would be my advice.
Thank you. So we have a question from Tomas. You want to?
Hey, Jerry, great to be with you. Curious your thoughts on why the country has taken a turn to the right since Ronald Reagan was president.
Well, it's always has a rightward tilt, I think, except for Roosevelt's second term, when he was very, very radical in his proposals. But why are we're a conservative country. And the progressives are changing a lot of rules, behaviors. And then on the other hand, you've got a lot of conservative people that are freaked out by all this. So you just got, you got the fundamentalists, you have the more staid people. I can tell you, if you take half the thoughts that are prevalent in Berkeley, you try to promote them around Williams, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. It would seem totally alien. In fact, a lady who lives up the street, conservative, 12 miles from her, when she drives by, I often stop her. She made some comment about Biden, the president. I don't know what she didn't say, but it was the idea of how could this be that we have such a person like this? In her mind, it was unthinkable that Biden should even be. That's from a conservative point of view. So I assume she's voting for Trump, which is, in my mind, crazy. Guy doesn't even believe elections. Completely. So how is all that? I think the onrush of events, the undermining of more traditional ways is shocking many people. And so they're looking for any safe harbor. And paradoxically, Trump is the safe harbor. Even though he's a philanderer, a liar, dyes his hair, he's a showman, and yet he's not the establishment. He's not Washington as usual. So people are saying maybe he can stop the horror of where the modern world is taking us. That's my explanation. I don't know how. I think that explains some of it. But yeah, we're on the one hand, universities are moving left, and then the world's moving right. Trump, in the latest polls, a few points ahead of Biden. Still think Biden can win, but it's a conservative world out there. I can say my neighbors are very neighborly. they're very friendly. They're very helpful. They know how to fix things. If things break, I can call an neighbor and say, hey, my irrigation pipe's broken. Guy comes over, digs down, knows what to do, cuts it, fixes it, glues it, all done. So this is the world of doing things within your grasp, and it's very nice. What their theoretical ideas are, I'm sure I wouldn't agree with many of them. So why we're going conservative, even with Biden, how we got ourselves in that Ukrainian situation. Yeah, Putin, it's a lot to do with it, but you can't. We help lay the groundwork, and wherever it is in Israel, where we've let the West Bank, the settlers, 600,000 of them, 700,000. That doesn't help, and now we're full speed ahead confrontation with China. So yeah, I know it makes sense. Taiwan's a good democracy, but are we going to have a nuclear war over that? Maybe. So yeah, the world's going conservative, and yet even the liberal part is pretty well bound up. I was reading a report that somebody some testimony on the arms budget, the military budget, and the 5 new nuclear weapon systems, 5 of them, and how many hundreds of billions over the next 30 years they'll take. I thought there was what obscenity. We already have, several thousand nuclear weapons. We're going to build new ones because we want to make sure they're going to work. But I'm not saying unilaterally disarm, but there's a confidence, there's a complacency that building all these weapons is somehow going to make us safer, which I don't believe it is. It's making us more unsafe. And then what came out here, this is not the world going conservative, but the arms sales, total arms sales in the world, according to the Stockholm Peace Foundation, is 2.4 billion. No, is that right? 2.4 trillion. 2.4 trillion of weapons, machinery of suffering and death. So it's pretty damn crazy. So we got the Biden craziness, we got the status quo craziness, which according to Dan Ellsberg, it's like we're on the Titanic, full speed ahead. And then we got the Trump craziness and all around. So yeah, I'd say this is a good time for practice, good time for clarity. So, but I'm not discouraged. So
good time to be in Calusa.
So I'm not discouraged, but I have no reason not to be. Except
we're out of time, but Katrinka from the island of Bali has sent in a question. She wanted just a few very short comments on climate change, how you're looking at climate change these days.
Well, I have started an institute, the California China Climate Institute, and we're working closely with Chinese provinces, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangdong, things like that. And yeah, vital. All our problems today, they're going to be much worse. And it's going to be it's not going to be reversible in any human scale. So we're heading over the cliff, hottest year on record. So, and this is why we got all these disputes, firing all these weapons, and we're not dealing with climate. We've got to get off coal. We've got to get off oil. We've got to get off gas. And we can't, but it takes money, it takes political will. And we got to work with China. China is the biggest polluter. It's also the biggest creator of solar and wind and batteries. So they've got a lot of things that we don't like, but we got a lot of things we shouldn't like about ourselves. So the climate is a unifying theme. It's what I call the basis of planetary realism. Not national interest, but common interest. Common vulnerability should lead to common interest. And climate is one of those. Of course, reducing the threat of nuclear weapons is another one. And reducing the threat of bio threats, which are going to get out of hand with AI and CRISPR-4 and all the ability to manufacture pathogens. So humankind has created enormous power, and that power allows us to be in this meeting. But it's also the dark side, and we need wise people not to be comfortable in the state of the world as it is, because it's very unstable, very unstable. I do not understand why they look so comfortable. And as I looked at the New York Times story, or no, the Washington Post story on the White House press dinner. If you just read that, I mean, it's incredible. It's like the last dinner on the Titanic. I mean, they're all cavorting and joking and laughing, but climate, the other issues, people dying all over the world. There's a lot to be done. There's good, solid stuff. And somehow we got to pull back. And I mean, it's really not us, it's the leaders who have to do that. But our politics, there's always openings. So I always remain hopeful and optimistic. And as someone told me, well, I'll tell you, it was Bill Perry, the Secretary of Defense under Clinton. I said, what gives you hope about the future, Bill? He said, it's uncertain. It's uncertain. We don't know what's
Right.
going to happen. So don't think it's going to be bad. May well be good.
Right. That's exactly in line with where we're at. Yeah. Jerry, let's wrap it up there. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on our series. It's just been really wonderful to hear your backstory and hear more about you that we often don't get. And let me just read that poem again, if I might. Not deciding it is or isn't. Do you have the courage to be at peace with this? Everyone wants to leave the endless changes, but when you're finished bending and fitting your lives, you come back to sit by the charcoal fire. So thank you, former Governor Jerry Brown, and Zen friend and Bodhisattva in the political realm, for coming on and talking to us tonight.
Well, thanks for listening.
Absolutely.
A lot of detail there.
All right. Thank you all for coming. And we will see you next time.
All the best.
Thanks. And thank you, Evan, for help set up.
Absolutely.
He's there. Evan's been quiet, very modest. That's a rabbit just passing outside my window. All right. Good sign.
Good night, Jerry. Good night, all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John Tarrant.
Thanks, John. Great, wonderful thing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have you guys in the mix as well.